Hey there, whiskey fans. Welcome back to Whiskey Minute with the Highlander. Today we're in Tucson, Arizona at Whiskey Del Bac. What attracted us to come down here was they've got a wonderful single malt, or so we've been told, and we locked upon grabbing their head distiller, Mark. So Mark, could you introduce yourself to the folks and tell us a wee bit about your job here and how Whiskey Del Bac name came about?
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for being here. My name's Mark A. Viertaler. I'm the head distiller here at Whiskey Del Bac. Whiskey Del Bac. So we are celebrating, I want to say it's 13 years this year. So making American single malt whiskey, really interesting story. So, you know, if you've ever been here in the Sonoran Desert, you'll notice we have these really aggressive weather patterns. Very dry, very hot, gets very cold, very warm. And so we were kind of born out of this idea from our co-founder, Stephen Paul. He used to have a furniture shop here in Tucson that he specifically worked with mesquite wood. And I always say I'm contractually obligated to tell this story. He would take the scraps of mesquite home, and he and his wife Elaine would cook with them, and he would say, "There go our profits, up in smoke." I told the story. But Elaine, his wife, kind of had this idea. So, you know, they drink a lot of Scottish single malt. Right. And she had the idea one night, hey, you know, people use peat to dry malt in Scotland. Has anyone ever considered using mesquite for that? Mesquite, if you're not familiar, is an indigenous tree here in southern Arizona. Very beautiful, very gnarled. Used a lot in cooking, used a lot in barbecue. It has a very distinctive flavor. Right. So Stephen he's the kind of guy that once he gets his teeth into things, he really does the research. So taught himself how to floor malt, taught himself how to distill, and all these years later, we now have Whiskey Del Bac, which is an American single malt whiskey. We do have some unsmoked ones that are kind of your traditional, just 100% unsmoked malted barley. But what we're known for is our Dorado, and that is our mesquited, not peated, American single malt. That is what we use to dry. So we use mesquite to dry our malt instead of peat. So it lends this very unique, very beautiful, very distinctly southern Arizona flavor to the whiskey itself. And the name Whiskey Del Bac is actually really, really cool because it's trilingual. So obviously we have whiskey, English, Del is Spanish for of, and then Bac actually comes from the San Xavier del Bac mission here in Tucson. So San Xavier del Bac, Bac is the indigenous Tana Autumn word for a place where the water reemerges in the sand. So for us, we are whiskey of the place where water reemerges in the sand.
Nice. And you're making Usqueria.
Usqueria.
Water of life. Oh, that's a nice mouthful there. We're in the place where water re-emerges from the sand to become water of life.
Exactly.
Grand, bloody grand. All right, well, and how long have you been here?
I have been the head distiller here for about 3 years. Okay. So I actually started my distilling journey back in my hometown, back in Kansas. Opened a distillery called Boot Hill Distillery. I was there for about 3 years. Had the opportunity to take over as the head distiller at a distillery just outside of Baltimore, Maryland, called 10th Ward. I was the head distiller there for also about 3 years. Left there and I was doing some consulting work and enjoyed that, but really missed the day-to-day, like really missed the hands-on making of the whiskey. Right. A friend of mine happened to be doing some consulting here at Whiskey Del Bac, and she just called me one day. She was like, hey, do you want to get back into the day-to-day? And I said, I do. Because have you ever considered the desert Southwest? Well, you never really considered it, but it's not off the table. Really. Yeah, and
it's not the first place that comes to mind.
Right. But she then said, well, there's a whiskey brand, and they're looking for a head distiller. They need one. And I had heard of Whiskey Del Bac back east. And so I knew it was one of two. And so she was like, yeah, it's Whiskey Del Bac. And yeah, started the interview process and really got to know Stephen and his daughter Amanda, who's also our co-founder, Kent, our CEO, and just was absolutely floored by what Whiskey Del Bac was doing. Like, you know, some people feel like terroir is a dirty word in whiskey because, you know, we're distilling, we're kind of turning something into a commodity during the distillation aspect. But when you lean into what the area gives you, you can create that kind of terroir. And I think that's what Whiskey Del Bac had done, is leaning into dry summers, leaning into aggressive temperature fluctuations, creating something that is born of this idea of the Scottish model, but is very distinctly of Tucson.
Magnificent. All right, well, that's wonderful, folks. Thanks for coming in our journey, and be sure and like, subscribe, and follow. Join us for the full tour of the distillery. We'll be releasing those parts in the coming weeks. Till next time, Highlander Mark signing off with this. Slàinte mhath.